Hello, folks. I am sad to say that this is our 10th and final installment of Queen Storytellers. I'm your host, David Lawson. What a joy it has been these past few weeks releasing these videos of all of these writers and performers who come to writing and performing from so many avenues, disciplines, backgrounds, coming together and being united behind this one type of writing and performing storytelling. These folks coming to us and performing directly to you at home true stories that actually happened in their own lives. It's really been wonderful to present these stories for all of you good folks. It has been just fantastic working with the great folks at the Queen's Theater who have been running this show. And I'm sad that it's over, but let me tell you, I can't get too down because we have an excellent final 5 performers for you this week on Queen Storytellers. Let's get right to it. The first performer you are all going to be hearing from is Alex Suze, who performs music all around New York City as a member of the band Binder Suze. She's going to be performing a story of finding out her ancestry. After her, we are going to be hearing from Sharon Spell, who recently performed at Caroline's Comedy Club as part of their breakout series. She's going to be performing a story about her family's former home that is sadly no longer standing. After Sharon, we are going to be hearing from Lori Baird. Lori Baird, who you may have heard on the Moth Radio Hour. She is going to be performing a story about her recent diagnosis of PTSD. After Lori Baird, we're going to be hearing from Amber Drea. Amber Drea, who you may have heard on the popular storytelling podcast Risk. Amber's going to be performing a story of getting a letter in the mail, remember those, from her mother, who she hadn't heard from in several years, and what happened after she got that letter. And our final performer this episode is Will Carey, who hosts the podcast Between Awesome and Disaster. He's going to be performing a story of being part of a workers' protest in Chile. Folks, I have to tell you, I mentioned something like this before, but it really was fantastic for me to go on Zoom in the times that we've been living through these last few months, to go on Zoom and have all of these wonderful writers and performers perform these stories to me as an audience of one sitting at my computer. And I could tell reviewing the footage, and I could tell from all of you folks watching these videos the last few months, that all of those feelings and all of those jokes, that they were really coming across on these videos. That, yes, in recent memory, we have not been able to actually be under the roof of the Queen's Theater and be hearing these great stories on the stage there. But it has really been a pleasure and an honor, in fact, to have these 50 performers over these past 10 installments of Queen Storytellers come to all of you and perform these stories. We all have these great performances captured that we could watch at any time. And I'm really happy, folks, that these are the 5 performers that we are going to be concluding Queen Storytellers with. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you like what you see, go to queenstheater.org. Check out the great programming that the wonderful folks at Queen's Theater have going on for you. Like them on Facebook at Queen's Theater. And as I love saying, it's Queen's Theater, R-E, not Queen's Theater, E-R. This has been such a pleasure hosting these 50 performers for all of you good folks at home. And I have to say thank you all so much for watching these great performances. I have been your host, David Lawson. This is Queen Storytellers, and let's get to it. Enough of the maudlin last episode crap. Please enjoy this 10th and this final episode of Queen Storytellers.
So, I was a white girl until 2005. Allow me to explain. I have been asked, what are you, pretty much since childhood, but it really kicked up a notch when I became an actor. Directors, casting directors, producers, because there were times people just didn't know where to put me, because apparently I don't look like the heritage that I knew I was. My family always told me, well, we are Danish, French, and Scottish. Danish. Now, if you met my mom, there was no denying this. She's white. And I knew my Danish grandmother. I loved her. She came straight from Copenhagen. And I have cousins in Denmark now. I was hoping to visit them. Damn you, COVID. But you know, it is one of those things. And apparently, there was one time we were in Denmark and we're having lunch with my great aunt, my tante Matilda. And at one point she looks at me and she's just rocking and she says, "Du ligner min mor. Du ligner min mor." And now, as I was not taught Danish by my mother, I had to lean over her. I'm like, what is she saying? And at one point my mom listens and then she laughs and she goes, oh, she says you look just like her mother. So apparently I even look like my Danish great-grandmother. So I didn't think this would be a thing. My dad's side, a little more complicated. My father was older. He was 56 when I was born. So his parents already gone. And he had a younger sister, but they didn't have as much contact back then. Like we would get a Christmas card, but we never had any photos of her and she never sent us any. And my dad didn't even have a photo album, but he said that he was of French and Scottish descent. And why would we ever not believe that? So, you know, it just was what it was. But apparently I was confusing a whole lot of people. But it's still also a little tiring when you're trying to, you know, get work as an actor and you are a white person, but you're getting cast as Black or Hispanic. And you're also like, I don't want to take jobs from people, but oh my God, I really want this role. So it was getting to be a little much. I don't want to say this was the last straw, but it kind of was the last day I realized I wanted to ever answer that question. It's 2003. And I get a call from a casting agent saying, hey, we're sending you in for a go-see with Iman. Now, Iman, wonderful, fabulous fashion model, was putting out a book that was targeted just for women of color, this wonderful makeup book. And I'm like, this sounds great. But do you know my actual background? And this was definitely a weird thing where I'm like, do I want to go in for this? Because even though it could just be an image and maybe I look Latina for that, do I want to go in as long as I don't have to say anything or whatever? It was confusing. Anyway, I decide I'm going to go in because that's the one rule of auditioning. You show up. So even if you're not right for this thing, you're supposed to just, you know, maybe you're right for something else. So showing up is good. And heck, I would meet Iman. So I go in. And you know, first you get the guy who's got the Polaroid because they always take a picture of you first so they remember you after like totally forgetting who you are after you leave. And there's a personal assistant. And then there is Iman. She is in jeans, a navy blue hoodie, and a black baseball cap. And of course, she still looks amazing because she's Iman. And I'm like, wow, you know, she's a supermodel. And she's an activist, she's really wonderful, and I love the idea of this book. But at the same time, as we shake hands, she says hello, I realize that as I touch her hand has touched all of David Bowie. And so I am like, oh my God, and I'm hoping that, you know, I'm thinking through osmosis, I'm officially touching David Bowie. This is an amazing little moment for me. After that, and after I get over that, we sit down and she says, so, what is your name? And I say, it's Alexandra de Suze. And where are you from? And I say, I'm originally from the Boston area. And what is your heritage? And of course, for anybody else, this is an easy question. But for me, lots of drama. But I sit there and I just tell her, I'm like, well, I'm Danish, French, and Scottish. And crickets. Absolute crickets in the room. Until I say, well, there is possibly a connection to Grenada, because there was. Apparently, my father's father had a piece of land in Grenada, and my dad was told about it and needed to sell it. That's as much as I knew. So I say, this is connection to Grenada, and she says, yes, I see that. But thank you for coming in, Alexandra. Thank you. And I go. And I'm just like, oh my God. I realized right then, I never wanted to have to answer that question ever again. And for two reasons. First of all, I realized I didn't want to just be, I didn't want to be a white actor. I didn't want to be a black actor. I didn't want to play white roles, black roles, Hispanic roles. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to do musical theater, and I've been lucky enough to do HMS Pinafore and Pirates of Penzance. I've also done Showboat, and I've done Once on This Island and things like that. But I didn't want to have my face be the only reason I ever got a role. But I also knew I needed to find out the truth because something was going on. I was like to say, in Boston, I was black. In New York, I'm Puerto Rican. And I couldn't just go around believing I was just this white girl anymore. So in 2003, I started my search. And I want to let you know, Ancestry wasn't a thing yet. Facebook and Twitter were not around yet. Google wasn't even around yet. So you just were on the web. So this made this a little more challenging. It was 2 years after I put out my first messages on rootsweb.com and genealogy.com that I finally got an email saying, hey, I think I have your father's parents' marriage records. And there it was. Carlisle de Suze, colored, Grenada, married Margaret Arbuthnot Nichols, colored, Grenada, British West Indies. So now I knew the truth. My father indeed had been a black man who'd been passing his entire adult life. Now he wasn't able to share who he was at the time, starting a career in the late 1930s and 40s. But I'm able to do that now. So if anybody needs this mixed race, Danish and West Indian mezzo, give me a call. And that's my story. Thank you.
Nobody really cares about your dreams. And I don't mean your aspirations, I mean the dreams you have when you're asleep. Part of the social contract, though, you have to listen to people describe their dreams, much like you have to listen to somebody describe why they were late for something. The train kept stopping and starting and stopping and starting. Nobody really cares. Just let's get on with the meeting or the surgery or whatever you were late to. Part of the social contract is also listening to people's dreams. It doesn't really matter that there was a bear eating your cake, but you need to tell it and I'll listen and it's fine. So I've been dreaming a lot lately as I've been sheltering in place in Astoria about homes I've lived in, other shelters, apartments, houses. And one house in particular that I've dreamt about is the Rook House. Now, this house dates to the early 1900s in South Mississippi, where I'm from. And my parents purchased this when I was still in elementary school. They purchased this little house, but it was a little house because it was built from the leftovers from a Sears Alhambra house kit that was sent down on the railroad for the Rook family who had a home on Hardy Street. And over the decades, that Alhambra house had fallen to disrepair and was slated to be razed. Actually, the church on the corner had purchased the lot and was ready to tear down the house to put up a parking lot, like the song goes. But my parents bought the little house, the leftovers, that we started calling the Rook House. And as a kid, this was exciting, but I was 10 and I wasn't really old enough to help, but I couldn't be like left alone, but I could kind of be left alone. And so my parents brought me with them while they fixed up the house. And when I say they fixed up the house, it was originally 2 rooms, like a bedroom and a kitchen, and that was it. And over time, over the decades, the front and back porches got enclosed to add another room and a bathroom, indoor plumbing, and then a back porch. So my parents are fixing up this old home with the original floorboards and the concrete walls from that are decades old. And 10-year-old Sharon Spell looking for something to do. And they had painted the outside, and I saw the paint bucket and the brush and thought, I want to help paint. Even though they've already painted, I'll just paint over what they've already done. And then no harm, no foul. Except I didn't realize that the paint and the bucket separated, so that when I put the paintbrush into the paint, it was actually a different color. And I painted on there XO, XO, hugs and kisses for everyone. And it stayed. And my parents were livid, but what could they do? Well, they punished me. That's what they could do. But they didn't paint over it, which I never knew why. Still to this day, don't know why. Which is funny because my brother and I only recently talked about this, because my family traditionally did not talk about things. But my brother had seen it and thought it was Y-O-Y-O-Y instead of X-O-X-O. Like, why, oh, why? And I say he noticed it because over the years, even though this was meant to be an investment property in South Mississippi, it was close to the University of Southern Mississippi, but also South Mississippi, but also renters could stay there, but also most of the renters were family. So my brother lived there for a long time. My cousins lived there. And over the years, I fantasized about my turn to live there. And it wasn't until my sophomore year in college that the final cousin who lived there moved out, and I got my chance to move in to the Rook House. And I was over the moon to get in there and enjoy the rickety hardwood floors and the gas heater that the pilot light kept blowing out on and filling the room with gas, and the windows that didn't hold cold air or hot air, the the ceiling fans that were wonky, the toilet that kind of leaned back to the back of the house. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it because this was my first taste of freedom from my parents. I was technically still living under their roof, but I was separate from the home I grew up in. And this is the home where I started discovering my voice as an adult, where I switched my major to art, where I went on epic road trips with my friends and didn't tell my parents because I didn't have to, because they didn't know I wasn't coming home that night. This is also the place where I had my first grown-up romance. This is the place where I fell in love with a guy, and he slept over and he slept over and he slept over enough to where I told my conservative, very religious Baptist mother that he was living with me, but sleeping on the couch. I said, well, you better not let your daddy know. And I didn't, and she didn't. And it devastated me when he broke up with me. And I went through my first grown-up heartbreak in that home. But then started planning my escape from Mississippi to Pittsburgh, which is where I moved after graduation. And that home, I think of that time and that place as a springboard to the next things to come. And it gave me the security I needed, but also gave me a little push, because there was no way that I could continue living there. And the next people who lived there were friends of mine from the university, and then more cousins. And then the final person who lived there ended up trashing the place. She not only stole light fixtures, but had dogs who left, my dad called them bouquets, throughout the house. And they decided they were done. And I couldn't handle it at the time, but I understood it, and I didn't understand it, because I was attached to that house emotionally, but physically I knew I wouldn't live there again. I had this fantasy that I would go back and live there as an adult, but I couldn't see how or why or the way. So when my parents ended up selling the house to the church from the earlier part, the church on the corner that had bought the original house, built a parking lot. They had been, over the decades, buying other parts of land on that block. So when the church bought our rook house, I thought it was done for. But to my surprise, they kept it and they refurbished it. And I could see through the windows. There were 13 windows encasing that front room that used to be the front porch. And I could see they were using it for storage. And I thought, that's fine. It got a reprieve. It had some new life. And so by the time that my parents told me that they did decide to demolish that house, I had had time to accept it. I mean, I wasn't thrilled, but I understood it more, because at that point I lived in a Victorian house in Pittsburgh, which was falling apart. So I had my own falling apart house to deal with there. And I understood it had served its usefulness, and at this point was a burden. So when I came back to Hattiesburg the next time, I saw that instead of a parking lot, it was a playground for their congregation's kids, with childproof edges and no spare buckets of paint lying around for kids who were bored. When I was growing up, my daddy used to ask, will it matter in 40 years? If we were upset about something, some little thing, will it matter in 40 years? If the answer is no, don't worry about it. If it's yes, worry about it. The house outlived 40, 80 plus years. And that's the thing that encased the love. And when I dream about that house now, in my memory, in my mind, it is that time and place of freedom, artistic exploration, reaching out, wanting to be part of a community, finding my voice, finding connections with people. And in those dreams, there are extra rooms and extra floors so more people can be invited. And that's the energy that I wake up with when I dream about this house. That's the love that I want to share now. That's the thing that will matter in 40 years. XOXO, y'all.
So I was thinking about trauma as soon as the pandemic arrived in New York. I have a personal history of chronic childhood trauma, so I've come by the interest in the subject, honestly. At first, my meanderings, my thought meanderings about the pandemic were academic. When I started working from home on March 16th, there were only 50 confirmed cases of COVID in the city. And so I was mostly watching the news coming out of Italy, looking at pictures of the 1918 pandemic and wondering, what does it do to people to live through something like that? But then things started to get a little more serious. Cuomo started giving his daily press briefings with those PowerPoints, and the number of hospitalizations and deaths was going up, and the projections were absolutely terrifying. Older people seem to be more at risk, and I'm 57. Queens was a hot spot for cases. And then 3 of my coworkers got sick. And that's when I started to wonder, is this trauma? Am I living in trauma right now? I didn't really feel like it. So I told myself, look, you're not an essential worker. You don't need to go to work. You can work from home. You are at home. You're healthy. You're okay. But at the same time, I also felt kind of spacey and edgy. And I had a hard time focusing at work. And I was really distractible. And some days I would just be staring at Reddit all day, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and not even realize where the time went. And then people started losing their jobs. Most of the businesses in my neighborhood in Astoria closed. The New York Times headlines about the economy were absolutely terrifying. People weren't getting paid for their unemployment because the system couldn't handle all of the claims. And then at work, I work at a hospital, we were told that the hospital was losing $450 million a month and that they were going to do everything they could to help us keep our jobs. And that pushed some buttons for me. I worked in book publishing, print book publishing, back in 2008 when the economy tanked the last time. And publishing lost more jobs than any other sector in New York City. I was a newly single freelancer back then, and I didn't work for almost 2 years. And it was really bad. I spent all of my savings. I have no family to rely on. And at one point, I didn't have enough money for a Metro card. And so I was really a wreck. But then I would tell myself, you're okay. You have a job right now. You have savings. You're not sick. You're okay. But I didn't feel okay. You know, I felt like I was filled with static. Like if you sliced me open, it would be all white noise and static. I was definitely drinking too much, which meant that I didn't get up early in the morning, which meant I didn't go for a run. And then I sat all day and felt shitty. I wasn't getting enough exercise. I wasn't eating well. I was sitting too much. I'm still sitting too much. And on top of everything else, I just felt kind of ashamed and I didn't quite know why. And then those videos and pictures and stories started to appear with the angry and tearful frontline workers, begging people to stay home, talking about PPE shortages, the personal protective equipment, and all of the people dying. And for work around this time, probably the 3rd or 4th weekend, I was writing a story and I interviewed some of our doctors and nurses. And one of them said to me that, we work for a pretty well-off hospital and we're used to having any treatment at our disposal to help people. And we're used to fixing them up and getting them home. And suddenly they're overrun with people with all who have the same condition. And there's no standard treatment and they're not helping people and people are dying. And then I talked to a resident, a 2nd-year resident, and this is a 27, 28-year-old woman to me as a kid. And she sounded so tired and she said, I've seen so much death. And that was just really devastating to me to hear a young person going through this. And I started to wonder, I started to know that doctors who are living through this were definitely going to be traumatized. And I was reading stories about something called a moral injury, when people have to take actions that are counter to their own personal beliefs. And, hearing stories of people maybe having to ration the ventilators. And it just depressed me no end. I just felt sad and awful about it. But then I said to myself, look, you think it's bad for you. You're not even in that situation. You're fine. But again, I just didn't feel fine. I started to feel just kind of dead and heavy inside. And I didn't even realize until the last week or so that I wasn't okay, and I knew it. And every time over the past few weeks that I said to myself, you've got a job, you haven't gotten sick, you have an apartment, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, I was using it as a cudgel against myself. I wasn't saying to myself, oh, don't worry, you're fine. I was saying, you're fine, shut up. Without meaning to, I had been torturing myself. And the reason I felt ashamed was that I felt bad for feeling sad and anxious and scared and worrying while other people were clearly suffering more than I was. It was like I was living in this contest, and whoever had it worst won, and everybody else didn't matter, didn't get to feel bad, didn't get to feel anything, and that's crazy. That's nuts. This isn't a contest, and it's not a zero-sum game. But that's what I learned as a kid, that my feelings didn't matter, that I didn't matter. And when I'm older now, and I do know better after years and years and years of therapy, but when we're in times of high stress, like during a pandemic, we have less access to our higher brain, to our more rational brain, and we're more likely to revert to old thinking and old patterns of thinking and behaving. And that's exactly what I was doing. And so now that I've had this realization that, I'm allowed to feel bad because this is a bad time and it's a scary time. I'm allowed to acknowledge the stress and worry I'm feeling. And that doesn't downplay what anybody else is going through. And yes, it is exhausting in my head sometimes. And going through this has been hard. But the nice thing is that I get to have this little epiphany, this little realization that that's what I was doing. I was going back to old behaviors and patterns of thinking. And that actually makes me kind of happy. And so, I know we're still in it, but I think, have I been traumatized by the pandemic? And no, I don't think I have been. I've been really stressed out sometimes, but all in all, I'm okay. But more important than that, the next time I'm not okay, I hope I remember that that's okay too. Thanks.
It was the summer before freshman year of high school in 1992. I lived with my dad in Connecticut, and I probably spent most of my summer reading books. I was that kind of kid. And one day my dad came into my bedroom and he had a letter for me. And he handed me the envelope, and I recognized the writing. And the return address said my mother's name. I had not heard from my mother in over 3 years. So it was quite a shock to get this letter. She actually sent it to my dad's mother's house because that's the only address she had. She didn't know where I lived. And so, my dad went and picked up the letter from my Nana's house. And when I went to open the letter, it had already been opened because my dad wanted to read it before he gave it to me. He wanted to make sure, it was okay. He wanted to see what she had to say before he passed it on. And, that makes sense since my mom doesn't have the best judgment. The last time I saw her was when I was 11 years old, and we were living in northern Florida with her father. And she'd gotten a gig singing with a cover band in Miami. And so she was going to go do that for a few months, and she said she'd be back. Well, she never came back. I think at some point she called my grandfather and was like, I got fired from the band for doing too much cocaine. I mean, I don't know if she told my grandfather this, but that was what happened. And she's like, I don't have any money and I can't get back up there. And my grandfather's like, well, I'm not giving you any more money. He'd had it with her. So he basically called my dad, and then my dad drove down from Connecticut to northern Florida to pick me up. And then I didn't hear from my mom again for a few months. And then we were living with my dad's mother at the time, and we got a phone call, and that was my mother telling me she was in rehab and that she was going to get better, and when she did, as soon as she did, she would come get me. And so, I believed her. I mean, why wouldn't I believe her, right? Well, 3 years went by and I never heard from her again after that one phone call from rehab. And I had assumed that she died, because what other reason is there for you not to contact your daughter for 3 years? I mean, come on. So, at that point, I was just like, I'm never going to see my mother again. I have no idea what happened to her. And so I opened this letter, and she proceeds to explain everything that happened over the last 3 years, which was she got out of rehab. She had nowhere to go. She lived on the streets, and then she started doing crack. And so she did that for a while. And then she met this man named Wayne. He used to, there was like this racetrack, like amateur racetrack, and she'd go down there. And he was there working on his car, and they became friends, and he brought her to his church, which just happened to be in someone's house. It was one of those kinds of churches. So it was like a congregation of like 5 people, and they met in this person's house every Sunday, and he brought her there. He was trying to, save her. And for a while she tried, she was trying to be clean, but then she eventually fell back into doing crack and disappeared from him for a while. And then one day she really wanted to end it all. She was gonna kill herself. She just was like, I don't know. I haven't seen my daughter in years. I don't have a place to live. This crack addiction is killing me. Why bother? And she was going to walk into traffic. And then she says that there was a voice in her head, which she believes is God. And that voice told her to go to that house where she'd been taken for church. And so she went there, and it just so happened that Wayne was there and other people were there, and they laid hands on her and they prayed and they healed her of her crack addiction. And she never wanted crack again after that. And then she started dating Wayne and going to church all the time, and she moved in with him, and then she got pregnant, and then they got married, and then that brings us up to speed of where they are now, living in Homestead, Florida, with a newborn baby. And she finally felt that she was in a good place to contact me again. I mean, she didn't want to contact me because what was she going to say? Hi, I'm homeless and I'm addicted to crack. Like, that's not, the best way to come back to being in your daughter's life again, So she wanted to build her life back up and get to a good place where she felt she really could be my mother again. And she apologized for not contacting me and for disappearing like that. And, she said, now God's in my life and I want you to be in my life. And, I believed her because she's my mother. And honestly, if that was how bad it was for her, then I'm glad that she had me go live with my dad. My dad was a great guy and he took really good care of me. And, that probably was just the best place for me to be at that time. My mom had a really rough life up until that point. She'd been beaten by most of her significant others, and, had just gone through a divorce with her husband, her second husband. And, she was just like in a really bad place in her life. And so it sort of led her to where she, turned to drugs and needed to escape and just decided, I can't do this anymore. And honestly, I can relate now that I'm a mother myself. My son has a lot of health issues and developmental delays, and he needs a lot of therapy. And, sometimes I'm like, I just want to run away, you know, but I'm not going to do that, obviously. I have a wonderful husband who, you know, is very supportive, and our son is beautiful. And, you know, it can be hard sometimes. But, you know, it's like now that I'm a mother, I can relate to that feeling of just being like, I can't do this, you know? But back then when she came back into my life, I was just like, you know, I'm so happy. Like, I'm so happy you are alive, and I'm so happy that we can have a relationship again. So I wanted to run to the phone and call her. And my dad was like, no, let's, you know, why don't you write her a letter first and see where it goes? Take it slow, you know? So I wrote her a letter, and then Hurricane Andrew happened, and it totally destroyed Homestead, Florida. And so my letter did not get to her for like 3 months, because she had left Homestead. She was living on the other side of Florida with her husband's family. And I'm surprised the letter ever even got to her. I mean, honestly, like, it could have just been destroyed or whatever, but I guess it sat in a post office for a couple of months, and then finally got to her. And she wrote back, and then we sort of had like a pen pal relationship. And finally my dad said it was okay for me to call, and that was like one of the most nerve-wracking days of my life, where when I sat down and picked up the phone and dialed that number, and I was going to hear my mother's voice for the first time in nearly 4 years at this point. Like, it was crazy. But as soon as I heard her voice, she was my mom, and I, you know, it was easy. And there's no one who, you know, showed me how much she loved me than my mom. I mean, you'd think, oh, what a terrible person she is. She left her daughter when she was 11 years old, and she did crack and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, she always told me that I was smart and beautiful, and that she loved me. And I knew it deep, deep down inside that she loved me. And that was all I needed, you know? And of course, my dad and his girlfriend did not feel very happy about this. They sort of wished that I'd be like, I never want to talk to her again. She's the worst, you know, but, you know, I of course, I'm not going to do that. And my dad's girlfriend actually was mad at me because she'd been taking care of me for the last couple of years. And all of a sudden now my mom's back, and it's almost like she felt like I didn't care about her anymore. But I mean, I had a lot of lost time we had to make up, you know, my mom and I. And so we would send each other mixtapes, and my mom would send me, like, her mixtapes would be full of like all her contemporary Christian rock music, and my mixtapes would be full of, like, you know, Mariah Carey and Wilson Phillips and all the other stuff that was really popular in the early 90s. And we'd send each other pictures of each other and drawings, and it was really cool to have that kind of, you know, pen pal relationship with my mom. And then I finally got to see her again. I finally got to go visit her the following summer. And my dad even paid for the ticket because she couldn't afford it. And, you know, we saw each other again for the first time in over 4 years. And I flew down to Miami just to stay with her for a week. And she, you know, ever since then, we've had an amazing relationship. You know, we've gone through all kinds of stuff. She tried to make me be a Christian for a while. And I tried it out because it's like, well, Jesus did save you from your crack addiction, so I guess I should give it a shot, you know. I mean, how bad could it be, right? But you know, we've both, you know, gone different ways and then come back to each other, and, you know, our relationship is stronger than ever now. So, you know, things work out eventually. So
This might not sound like it, but this is a story about the first time I tried abalone. It was August 2017, and I was in Santiago, Chile with my then girlfriend, now fiance, at a conference called the Global Federation of Unions. She's the director of communications for the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. This is a cause close to my heart because I spent years being overworked, underpaid, and generally disrespected while working at various big box retail and grocery stores. People in those jobs, as a rule, are not treated well by the customers or fairly by the employers. So I love an organization that stands up for people who work hard for not enough money. While we were at this conference, we learned that the union for leaders workers was in the middle of a contract negotiation that had reached an impasse on the final day of negotiations. If you're unfamiliar, Leader is a big box retail store in Chile that is owned and operated by a company well known for fair labor practices and generous compensation. Walmart. That would be like finding out your weight loss coach invented the cronut. Leaders, workers, and their union had a protest planned for that evening, and those of us from North America decided to join in solidarity. We took a bus from the hotel where this conference was occurring to their union hall. We walk inside, and there are hundreds of people in matching shirts, painting signs. There's somebody on stage giving an impassioned speech in Spanish. I cannot understand anything that is being said, but I am familiar with the cadence that comes when you're telling a group of people they cannot continue to treat us like this, and we're going to stand up to them and fight for what we are deserved. And that's the vibe that I took from that union hall. With the speech concluding, we headed into the streets with flyers and signs. My experience of protest marches is that there's uniform marching, some call and response chants, and it ends with everybody gathering in a big spot, waving signs. That is not what protests in South America are like. The closest thing I can compare this protest march to would be the crowd of a soccer match right after a goal is scored. There were people playing drums furiously. There were chants. There was singing, flags being waved. And as we marched our way down the street, fireworks started shooting off above our heads. Fireworks going off 10 feet above your head may unnerve some people, but having spent a number of years living in New York City on the 4th of July, it felt familiar. The plan was to march our way towards a park, and that was going to be our predetermined gathering place where the protest would conclude. We make our way down the street towards where this park is going to be, and we find that the entire park has been barricaded off by a metal police barricade. So we now have no place with which to gather. I learned later that this is not an uncommon practice. So the protesters and I did the next best thing. Naturally, we spread out into the street and obstructed 6 lanes of traffic. This was the point. If you've ever watched an 80s kids movie and remembered there is one character that goes, "I don't know about this, guys." That was me. That was what was going through my mind because my girlfriend and I were towards the front, just behind the leaders. And as we were walking down this 6 lanes of traffic that we have now blocked off, I saw a tank driving alongside us. This thing was easily 14 to 20 feet high from the tires to the turret. It looked like something out of the Mad Max movies. Suddenly, the tank accelerates out in front and then turns sharply to block our path. The entire group stops. There is a pause that feels like an eternity, and then the turret on top of the tank slowly turns toward us. And after another pause, suddenly a powerful burst of water becomes spring towards us. I look to my right where the park is and briefly contemplate jumping over the barricade and dashing through the other side of the park. Just as I'm about to do that, I feel my girlfriend grab my hand and start running the opposite direction from the tank, and I join her. And as we are running through the street, away from a tank shooting a powerful stream of water at us, I turn to her and I say, I love running from the police with you, dear. This is the part I want to reiterate, that we are getting married. The couple that protests together stays together. We have gotten lost together in Panama. We have walked through police blockades in Turkey, and we've run for our lives from Spanish soccer hooligans in Barcelona. This was not the first time that I have encountered peril with this woman abroad, and I have a feeling it's not going to be the last. We make a turn down another road near the park. The tank has followed behind us, but we are now at a place where we are out of range. I can hear people in the crowd screaming from the tear gas that has been infused in that water. And then out of nowhere, seemingly, I see a wall of riot police in full gear with the shields, pushing the crowd of protesters back, and anyone who resists is detained and arrested. And where am I and my girlfriend during this? She is as close as she can get. She is documenting everything that is happening with video and photos. I am prepared to dash off into the night and start my life anew in South America if prepared to. Eventually, the scene comes down. Our group reconvenes on this same road, away from the tank, away from the police, and our bus finds us. I limp my way to the back in shock, adrenaline coursing through my body, and I begin muttering to myself, why does this always happen? Why everywhere we go, why does this continue to happen? Is it possible to go somewhere where this doesn't happen? It was terrifying. And it was the first time that I had a front row seat to the kind of interaction with the police that 3 years later in 2020 is all too familiar now. I plopped down on a chair in our hotel lobby, thinking about nothing and everything all at the same time. A few minutes pass, and I hear somebody call my name. Will, we're going to dinner. On autopilot, I get into a small van that takes us to a small Italian restaurant where someone in the group asks me if I'd like to try abalone. And I said yes. The next day, the store leader agreed to the changes of the contract, and the contract was ratified. One of the photos my then girlfriend, now fiance, took won an award, a photojournalist award, and is hanging framed in our apartment today. All of these years later, I'm glad for the experience because it was the first time I saw that action and protests worked. I grew up in rural United States and with a chronic need to not cause trouble and avoid conflict at all costs. And that was when I learned and saw firsthand that part of standing up for yourself and fighting for what you deserve sometimes involves causing trouble, because the only way those on top are ever going to give you what you deserve is if you make them.